we have so much more to cover, and obviously we have 2 more weekends, 4 more episodes after today. The truth about reality creation, I want to save because that's a deep topic. But I took this out, and Hunter summarized this, so give Hunter credit on this. But the great task of humans residing in third density, and this is again your exact words, but to be able to discern between choosing a path that gives immediate physical comfort leading to great psychic stress and soul pain versus a path that may be physically uncomfortable temporarily, but ultimately produces peace of the heart. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's kind of comes up in the Bible, straight is the gate and narrow the way, and few there be that enter therein, because we are programmed. We are genetically programmed to seek, comfort, the good, what we like, what we want,
Right.
to reject anything that's unpleasant, and it takes, mental control over yourself to do something that is really painful now in order to have a better future in the future. And a typical example, when I got my divorce, it was the hardest thing I ever did. It really was the hardest thing I ever did. And it took an enormous amount of willpower and control and so forth, a lot of which, faded at different times. Come on, I had 5 children,
Yeah.
and I was born in this Christian, raised in this Christian background, and then marriage vows, they're real. They're forever. So I had to change my mind about that, and I did that, and it was extremely excruciatingly painful. But there are so many other things that people face or confront in their lives where, you have to deal with, cutting off relationships sometimes,
Yeah.
because from the evidence, and this is where seeing the unseen comes in. You see from the evidence, but you don't see on the surface that this relationship is really negative and bad, and you have to cut it off. And then the person comes and, oh, why did you cut me off? Why did and I didn't mean that. I didn't mean this, didn't mean the other thing, and you're being so cruel. And you just know that they don't understand, and they can't understand, and you just have to find some way to say no. But then there are other things, like I said, going through this attack process. It was really, extraordinarily educational. And incidentally, I just want to throw this in here. 2 of the main attackers that seemed to be, living it as a full-time job died, you know, rather unpleasantly. Um, so I always wondered about that because they just kind of imploded on themselves, I guess. But yeah, so there was that, and then there are so many other instances that I can think of, uh, and I'm sure you can think of, where doing the difficult thing is, the thing to do, and working on yourself. Now that's another thing that's difficult, because people don't realize that the main thing you need to do is you need to fuse yourself into a singular being, because all of us have programs, and I wrote about programs in The Wave. How you have these psychological programs. You're attuned to this, you're attuned to that, you like this, you don't like that. All of those things are, going all these different directions. You're one person with this person, and you're somebody else with the other person, and trying to fuse yourself into a singular being is not so easy. And it's also not so easy to see yourself. And Carlos Castaneda, his whole thing was kind of a riff on Gurdjieff, but
Mm-hmm.
he took Gurdjieff's ideas and he cast them in a different culture, and maybe there really was a Don Juan, maybe there wasn't. There's some argument about it. I knew somebody who personally knew him, worked with him, and he was fairly convinced that there was a lot of, you know, fiction going on there. And he talks about moving the assemblage point. And Mouravieff talks about fusing the emotional center, bringing everything and developing the eyes of the soul. And these are very precise terms for very precise activities. And, we kind of practice them and we teach them to other people. And sometimes the most unpleasant thing to do is to sit down with somebody you care about or several somebodies you care about and ask them to sincerely tell you how they see you and how you affect them and how they think you affect other people. In other words, to see yourself as others see you and to really get a glimpse of yourself and then to begin to work on those things so that you can stop being that way or doing that or get a feeling for it. And then there is also something that's very difficult. We call it the doctrine of the present, which is when you're in a situation that causes you to have an emotional reaction, and you have to learn this, and then you have to practice it in your life. Like your boss says or does something, or one of your coworkers or whatever, and you feel the heat rising, and when it gets up to here that you're gonna say or do something that you're gonna wish you didn't say or do.
Mm-hmm.
And the trick is to be able to stop it here.
Mm-hmm.
And to sit in it and cook with it and to be able to bring your brain into focus, because the minute that heat gets up here, your brain is going to be thinking in a different way.
Yeah.
Here's a good example. I'm pretty sure I use this in the way women understand this maybe better than men because they have periods.
Right.
And when they have periods, their hormones go. Okay. And when that happens, their thinking changes because something you could say to them one day and they would think, huh. And you say it to them the day their period starts, and then they just, oh, how could you be so you don't
Never
care,
had that happen to me.
you don't care anything about me. And
You're so shallow.
yeah, my husband is laughing over there in the corner.
Of course he is.
Yeah, he kept my periods tracked on an Excel page.
Smart guy.
So that he would know when he needed to back off and say, yes, dear, whatever you say, dear. But the example that I'm trying to get to here is that hormones can change how you think.
Yes.
You think today that what your husband said is nothing of any interest or import in terms of negative connotations. But then tomorrow your period starts and you think, and then what happens is your brain starts going and you start thinking of all the bad things he ever did, all the bad things he ever said, all the times he ever, failed you, assuming there are any. My husband never failed me. But yes. So, and your thinking changes. Okay. So that's what happens when you have an emotional shock. And it happens to everybody. I'm just using the example of women having periods because it's so evident in that case. And it's so easy to use as an example. But this kind of thing happens to everybody. Somebody says something, and it all of a sudden, everything you ever thought about them is changed. Your rose-colored glasses, get taken off, and you start seeing them with grim darkness.
Mm-hmm.
They never cared about me. They never, and then you start treating them in a nasty way. These are more or less casual examples. There's more to it. There are other kinds of shocks, but when you get a shock, the object is to learn how to keep your emotions here and to keep your brain clear so that you can actually see yourself reacting, see what your body is doing, know that these chemicals are being dumped in your brain, and to still maintain your cool and your directedness and your understanding of what's going on in the moment.
Mhm.
And we spend a lot of time working on that. And here's another thing. Most people don't really have a good, robust feedback mechanism
Mhm.
about other people's feelings. We all have a theory of mind, what other people are thinking, how they feel about us, what they, feel toward us. Um, and it may or may not be very accurate. So what you do is you go along thinking these things and building these theories and making these plans based on the theory of mind you have. Um, there's a couple of good books called Inside the Criminal Mind and something else about a famous psychologist that shows it in a criminal context, which is kind of like an exaggerated caricature, but it's what everybody does. You base all your thinking on your theory of mind, what other people are thinking and saying. Okay, what if in the moment you had people around you whom you could ask directly and they're going to give you a sincere and honest answer, what they think about what you're thinking, what they're thinking, and you have to be able to confess all your petty little thoughts. I was feeling like you really didn't like me anymore, and you said thus and so, and it hurt my feelings and so on. And nobody wants to say that because it sounds so childish and petty.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
is what goes on between people, and then those things can build and end up in divorces, right?
Totally.
Being able to have a feedback mechanism that tells you what is really going on and allow that person to explain what they really meant and what they were saying, and that helps you to attune this emotional center so that when you're feeling emotions, whether they are real or not, whether they have valid basis in factual information. The remarkable thing about doing this is you start to become telepathic,
Mhm.
literally telepathic, when you have feedback, because then your reading instrument is being trained to be able to literally communicate with this other person's mind. Okay? So, that's part of it. Controlling yourself. All these are very, very difficult things to do. When I'm describing it to you, I'm sure it sounds kind of simple, but it's not. It's not.
Only one question to that, because I just feel like I just got taken to school because that was incredible. Like that whole narrative you just put together. When we do that, so when we take those emotions and we block them from coming into our brain and then manifesting into communicating with people in a negative way and doing things that we were going to regret. When we make that choice, does each one of those choices that we individually make reverberate at a hyperdimensional level?
Because while that is happening, while you're in the state of shock, you are inducting energy
Mhm.
in your body. If you blow it all out, and you get into whatever and you say something mean or nasty, you've wasted a tremendous opportunity to induct
Mhm.
energy and to uh, crystallize your emotional center.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it goes into other realms, and you begin to become, you begin, and I mean, people in this house, we're so freaking telepathic. I mean, it's like, it's not even funny because we've been practicing this for like 20 years, just on a daily basis living. And that's why when people live in communities, and they have to be small, they can be big, small
Mhm.
communities where, it's like a large family, and they need to love each other and they need to get along together and so forth. But then they can begin practicing these kinds of,
Mhm.
and of course, when you have an extended family, then it's a lot easier to live because you're not solely responsible for everything yourself. But yeah, so that's kind of what we work on, and it's more than that. It's like taking advantage of negative feelings and using them as in the moment opportunities for growth and how to utilize them. A lot of this work is described in Mouravieff And a lot of, Gurdjieff was using his own little methods that we love Gurdjieff, but we don't necessarily think much of his cosmology or some of his methods, because maybe they worked when he was using them directly with his people, but after he was gone and people started trying to, imitate what he'd been doing, and it became kind of just rote. And we had a long interview with, William Patrick Patterson, who's one of the main purveyors of the Gurdjieffian work at this particular point in time. And he just knew nothing about hyperdimensional realities. His responses, I don't know, maybe I can find it and I'll send you the link to it, but it was a very, very disappointing. And at a certain point, I just turned off.
Yeah.
I quit trying to interact with him and just, let it go into rote, because when I realized there is no grounds, there is no place where anything overlaps. He's on an ego trip, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't change it.
It's interesting because Hunter and I are the same way. Like when we talk to people now, for whatever academic reasons, inside or outside of the things that we, discuss and work in every day, it's like, if you don't have a if you want to say multi-density or multi-dimensional, it's really multi-density perspective of reality. It's really kind of hard to have a bigger picture conversation with people because they're so linear. They're so in third density. It's honestly like, I mean, Hunter and I joke about this all the time, but it's like, it's really difficult for us to have meaningful conversations with our family members because they're not there, and you can't condemn them or judge them or, be negative or antagonistic towards them, but you also just have to like expect that you're just not going to have a top of the food chain conversation with them about reality. It's difficult, maneuvering third density when you are a quote unquote service to others candidate.
That's another thing that's good about living in a group. I mean, it's a lot family, and some of it became more family. I mean, we have 11 people in this house.
It's awesome.
And 3 of them are my children. 1 is my husband. 1 is my sister-in-law. 1 is my son-in-law. And then I have 4, unofficially adopted
children. Your bonus babies.
Our bonus children. Yeah. So, we just really, really like living together. We like working together. We have really refined everything, and it wasn't easy because there have been other people who have come and gone who wanted to be a part of it. And some of them were very destructive, and some of them just couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it.
Destructive to you, to your group, or destructive themselves and just couldn't sustain living amidst you?
They were destructive to the environment. I mean, they created such negativity in the house that it was like, when they were finally done, it was like, God, thank God we can breathe again. Because you spend all your time walking on eggshells because you're trying to help them, but they've got so many problems and so many issues that you just can't do it.
I mean, I'm like you, Laura. I just shut down.
Yeah, I just turn off when I have to. But I had that problem when I was a kid in school. I was in 4th grade in boarding school, and they tested me and they put me in a 10th grade reading class, reading and literature, because I was reading, 10th, 11th grade literature.
Mm-hmm.
And, that just tells you how bored I was with my peers in 4th grade when we tried to talk about anything that was, reading or interesting like that, because I was, up there. And it created a distance, and it was not very pleasant in certain ways, but there was nothing I could do about it. But yeah.
Thank God for the internet. And, like what the C said, I mean, the internet is I think they said 4th density, a form of 4th density networking, right?
Mm-hmm.